Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Lee, and welcome to Hudson Presents, Conversations with Contemporary Artists. This is a new talk show that we started this semester, and it will be coming to you guys via Zoom the whole time. Each month, I'll be talking to an artist one-on-one about their artwork and about their life. This whole thing was sort of a brainchild of Michelle Vitale, who's the director of the Department of Cultural Affairs here at Hudson County Community College. She's really spearheaded a bunch of different and interesting programs that will be primarily through the Zoom application or the WebEx application for this semester and who knows, into the future. If you want to know more about those, you can go to the Deneen Hull Gallery page on Facebook. That's DINEEN HULL Gallery, or you can always go to the Hudson County Community College page, hccc.edu, for more information. So this month I have the artist Laurie Riccadonna. Her show is up here at the Deneen Hall Gallery, where we're at today. It's entitled Eternal Bloom, and it's on view now through early June, which hopefully may mean that at some point somebody might see this in person. I certainly hope so, because they're well worth it. Laurie's an excellent painter, a longtime friend, and she's also my boss. She runs the art department here at Hudson, where she's also a professor of painting and drawing. I'll be talking with her about her work, about a little bit of the chronology of it, and what brought her to it. And then, of course, we'll take questions from you folks at the end. So I'll let you guys know at what point I want you to start typing things into the chat, and then we can answer the questions at the end. So let me mask up and go over there and meet Laurie Riccadonna. Thanks for coming in, guys. So hello, Laurie.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for doing this. Looking forward to the conversation.
So we're starting with the newest work first. This is what, a year old?
Yes, yeah, this is just about a year.
And the title of this piece is what?
Another Man's Treasure. It was a still life that I had set up in my studio, and obviously kind of dealing with the plastic pollution crisis. And I also think of this painting in a way as a little bit of a self-portrait, because all of the objects that are included in this pile of plastic are things that came out of our household, or maybe a few things were given to me by friends, or I found around our house when we're cleaning up litter and junk around our neighborhood. So everything in here I have a bit of an attachment to, but I hope that it conveys also a more universal message in terms of some environmental challenges that we're facing now.
So this was part of this plastic pollution series. As we go around the gallery today, we're going to see a few more of these from this series, but also a bunch of work from older series, going back all the way to, what, 1998?
Around 1998, 1999. Michelle Vitale, who curated this show, had kind of in her thoughts while she was putting this together is kind of sampling from different bodies of work that I've created. And they all kind of correspond to the timeline that I followed as teaching here at Hudson at the college.
And, I think we could say this easily qualifies as a mid-career retrospective because this is nearly 25 years of work, which is really quite something. It'll be interesting, I hope, for you folks, I mean, I know it is for me, to see how this painting sort of figures in to the life of the paintings that came right before it, and then some of the much, much older work. I know we were talking earlier today about these being portraits, and the idea that you spend a lot of time on these. They're hopefully you guys at home can see that it's a pretty labor-intensive affair. And I know you spoke earlier about beauty. Tell us like a little bit more of, that idea, because most people would think like trash isn't beautiful.
Right. Well, I think, as I was making this, this body of work is a little bit different from everything else that is included in this show, because I have always been interested in painting beautiful things, flowers, beautiful patterns, tiles. And I think with this series, I wanted to kind of push the envelope a little bit with what I was painting, so that I would paint these objects as beautifully as I possibly could, but yet kind of have that realization as you're looking through the painting that, it's a bottle cap or, plastic from a 6-pack of soda or something. And also contrast it with a lot of objects that have passed through my household. So for instance, there's a lot of little plastic toys and things that maybe came to my kids in a goodie bag or something like that. So there's both a personal connection to a lot of these things, and a lot of these things I've used. And then also, there's the repulsion of it being trash and things that are maybe used once or twice and then disposed of.
Maybe we can do a little close up. People are asking for it.
So while we see this close-up, it's probably worth telling folks that all of the pieces, unless we tell you otherwise, are oil on canvas or oil on linen, right?
Yes, they're all oil on canvas.
And it's a pretty juicy mix of the pigment itself plus stand oil.
Right.
So these are definitely their materiality is a big part of the, I guess, both the making of them, but also the viewing experience too.
Right. I mean, I think with the more recent work, I've kind of come back to the material of paint. I really love using paint. I like how paint builds up and just the the thickness of it and the immediacy of it. And so I think that that's a big part of the newer body of work. Some of the older examples are more flat pattern, which I also enjoyed working with, but I found, by making those paintings, that something that I really missed was the touch of putting the paint on the canvas.
That idea of sensuality seems central to these newest works, but I think we'll see that it touches on a lot of the other stuff. And when I say sensuality, I mean truly something that's sensate. You want to touch these things, and they just happen to be things that we actually grasp quite often.
And that's, I think, a big part of my work is that whether I'm painting tiles or puzzle pieces or plastic, I like the actual feel of the object. And often when I'm painting it, I'll be holding it, or, and a lot of the imagery is on a 1-to-1 scale so that it feels like the actual object. And, that's the tactility is definitely an important part of the work.
That's interesting. So why don't we come over here, and if we started with the very newest work, we'll continue with the very oldest work.
Right. So this piece is the oldest work in the show, and we decided to include it because I feel like it really sums up a lot of what I'm about as a painter. It's interesting to look at a body of work and then kind of identify these themes that run throughout even different series or different paintings. And I feel like this painting really kind of, all of these ideas are in there, and it's over the years I've kind of extracted them to create a variety of series. But this painting was made pretty much right out of graduate school. And I was really interested. I was looking a lot at tile decoration, and I was always very interested in pattern. And so pattern is dependent on having a grid for the most part. And I liked the idea of basing it on this tile pattern because I could play with the grid and I could disrupt the grid. So it wouldn't just be about pattern, but it could be also referencing architecture and kind of disintegration in a sense.
Yeah, I see that, in some of the, I guess you could call them quadrants within the quadrants, like in one of the 4 pieces, if you divided that up into quarters as well, it seems like one quarter might stay fairly stable,
Mhm.
while another one starts to get not so jumbled that it really, calls attention to itself, but just jumbled enough.
Right.
That seems important to
Yes.
have that sort of sense of I'm not sure what you would call it, chaos? Maybe
Yeah.
that's too strong.
Yeah.
But
Well, I like how in handmade tiles, when you have them arranged, nothing quite ever really matches up. So there's already that kind of slipping. And then, I would play with that in these pieces where things kind of slip out of place or move. And, I wanted them to be kind of, really like optical and a feast to look at, so that you kind of become disoriented as you're looking at them, that you're, things seem straight, but then they start to bend and move and slip out of place.
and I think that definitely, that desire is something that I think you can do with painting more than you could do with actually making tiles.
Right,
If you were a
Right.
tile maker, it would not look like this.
right,
And so that's, it gives credence to the idea of like why someone would be a sculptor or why someone would be a
Right.
painter or what
Right.
have you. So these tiles are, correct me if I'm wrong, not exactly 1-to-1, unless were they actually about 3 inches by 3 inches, or were they large?
I wasn't actually looking at real tile for this. I was looking at a variety of patterns, but I just based on the size of the canvases, I kind of scaled down
Sure.
with the tiles.
Yeah, I wasn't sure about that, but
Mhm.
if we go over to this next
Okay.
painting, and of course, like I know a little bit about these, maybe you folks don't, and this is why I ask, is because this painting, you are painting 1-to-1.
Yes.
And that's a very important part of it. So this series of the plastic pieces we saw was from, begun last year. I believe it's, still sort of like ongoing in a way.
Yes. Yeah.
This other piece is from, like, I can't even do the math, but a long time ago.
Yes.
And then these are from, what, a few years ago?
Just a few years ago. Yes. And so these kind of led to the work with the plastic images. I was working with actual puzzle pieces, and as Michael mentioned, all of the pieces are painted on a 1-to-1 scale. And it's a kind of a combination of a variety of puzzles. I would put these puzzles together in my studio and break them apart, or have friends put together puzzles for me and kind of break them into sections. And these paintings were really about like an impossible puzzle that it would never really all fit together. They were just sections. And the puzzles that I chose to paint were all images of Dutch still life paintings, and they were all these bouquets. So I thought of these puzzle paintings as a bouquet. And the paintings themselves are all, they're almost impossible paintings, because the artist would combine all different types of flowers at all different stages of blooming, and they wouldn't all in reality be blooming at the same time. So they were kind of these idealized bouquets. And in the same way, I felt like these paintings were the same, where it's like all of these flowers are in bloom, but nothing really fits together. And I also, enjoyed the aspect of it like disintegrating rather than it coming together, but it's like exploding out.
Sure. Were you counting on your audience being able to pinpoint these as sort of like, what do they call those people? I guess the Dutch masters, for
Right.
lack of a better phrase?
Not necessarily. I didn't want to paint them so that, they looked like it was a copy of the Dutch paintings, but I just really, liked the idea of it being a bouquet. And the floral, these were all part of the Dutch paintings that I was referencing are vanitas paintings, which means vanitas is the shortness of life, and it shows the shortness of life. So a bouquet may be completely in bloom one day, and then the next day the petals are falling off and it's falling apart. And I really like that aspect, and that's what I was hoping to convey in these pieces.
I think it really comes across well, and the idea that you were saying, this disintegration,
Mhm.
is is basically told in the same breath as this alleged unification, right?
Right.
Was there something that you felt, some sort of like outward stimulus in your life that made you think about what really was a pretty heavy subject? I mean, the Vanitas paintings come from like a really intense, like, Christian tradition.
Right.
I mean, it's all about life and death. It's all about like, have you lived a good life, right?
Right.
Because it's like, you have no idea when you're going to get
Right.
snuffed out.
Right.
Or was it more of a just a good anchor,
I think a little bit of both. I mean, I started this series when my children were very young, so I think that that certainly had a little bit of impact. I also like this just in terms of I could paint a small section in a certain amount of time and be done with that section, and then move, take a break.
Yeah, sure.
So I think it kind of fit where I was with my life. But I think those themes are something that I'm thinking about a lot. And I had, previous to this, painted a series of paintings that I called the Hanging Garden series. So gardens and just kind of the, change of season and change of life is always something that I'm, thinking about when I'm in the studio.
It's an interesting confluence of, thinking about nature in its like, it's in the real way, but then
Right.
also, you as a human being, as a puzzle maker. I mean, I know that we were speaking with Michelle earlier about how everyone but everyone has a memory of being with like their nonna,
Right.
or whoever, making a puzzle,
Right.
being with their parents. It's something that everyone, I think, can understand, and yet at the same time, how prosaic,
Right.
how normal. But I think it's that normalcy that can become like a very powerful thing. When I first saw these, I guess when you were first finished with them, that's what I felt. It was like, wow, you could take a subject that's sort of like so simple, but it has a really deep impact.
Yeah.
And
I found a lot of similarities between the painting process and putting together a puzzle.
I can imagine.
So, there's always kind of a routine when people sit down to make their puzzle. They sort out their colors and, maybe make the border. And so I started, as I was working on it, it felt like as the puzzle was being unveiled, the painting was being unveiled in a way. And, often I would draw everything out by tracing the puzzle pieces onto the canvas and without tracing the imagery. So as I worked on them, it kind of like revealed itself to me, so that I didn't really know what it was going to look like at the, from the beginning. And it just, as I worked on it, then, it kind of revealed itself.
Sure, that's very interesting. And I know we have plenty of artists in the audience tonight, but of course, a lot of people that don't make art at all, or at least, paintings like this. But I think when most people have this idea of an artist not knowing what their work is going to end up looking like, I think most people have that vision of like, an abstract expressionist, like
Right.
that sort of way of like call and response work. But for something that looks like it's based in such reality, I think folks might find that surprising, but it's interesting. I think that's maybe how all painters work to some degree.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very good. Let's move on over to a series that came before the puzzles, and you'll let us know like just how much they prefigured the puzzles and sort of like the ideas that came.
These paintings are all a series called The Hanging Garden, and they were exhibited together. And this piece, the three small ones, and this, and then there were other paintings that went with this series, but they were all kind of loosely based on this larger piece. I really like to work large, and I feel most comfortable when I'm working on really large pieces. And as I was working on it, then I would work into some of the smaller pieces. Sometimes just I would find an area that I liked and then execute it on a smaller scale or make it into its own painting. But like the tile pieces, these are loosely based on a grid. I was thinking more in these paintings that it was more like a fence or a wall of a house. And you know, it's like the architecture is broken. So it's the plant life and the patterns and the critters in the, you know, in the patterns that hold it all together. So it's all kind of, you know, hanging in balance and supported by all of these little details and stories that happen in the painting.
That's funny. I never would have guessed that the hanging garden had that implication.
Yes, yeah.
Like hanging by a thread.
By a thread, yeah.
These are so complex, but in a very different way than the puzzle paintings.
Right.
You know, because the puzzles existed literally in a single plane.
Right.
You know, pieces on a table, a desk. What was the impetus to make such sort of a complicated alternating depths?
Well, I think it's something that, you know, I still think of these as very flat, but maybe the depth is just a little bit deeper in these. And, you know, like I said, I was looking at fences or pieces of architecture, buildings that were like falling apart. And so, you know, I wanted there definitely to be different planes, like you're peeking through something and you see a scene beyond that. And so even though there's a lot of flat planes of color and pattern, you know, I think with the colors, there's definitely like a push and pull. So some things seem further back than the others. And so that was definitely something that I was working towards in this.
The idea of, you know, the nature is the thing that holds it together.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this would be a perfect time to ask, like, this is a very broad question. What do you think about when you think about nature? It seems like, you know, nature triumphant
Right.
in these works.
Yeah.
You obviously have a very, you know, deep connection to this. Where does it come from, and like, how do you feel like it, you know, it manifests in not just this work, but like so much of the other work?
I think a lot of it comes from, you know, memories as a child of being outside and the kind of discovery that happens when, you know, a kid is playing outside and they look under a rock and see something. I also think that a lot of it is living in the city makes me appreciate, you know, those opportunities even more. These particular paintings were created after a trip to the Adirondacks. My family used to go there every summer, so there was a lot of like direct inspiration from, you know, specific times and trips outside.
Sure. And so you definitely try to do what you did as a kid with your own kids.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
When I was looking at, you know, all of the work earlier in the gallery, I had a feeling, and I guess I thought about this for a while without ever coming to a real solution. We paint nature, but you always paint things that are close up. There's never a vista.
Yeah.
If you've ever, like, you know, done things sort of like in the you know, en plein air style, it's still like basically setting up something 3 feet away or a foot away or 6 inches away. You're never giving yourself or viewers like a broad expanse.
Right.
Why is that?
That's a good question. I think I just love tiny detail, and I'm always interested in, you know, even when there is a vista, being able to really like zoom in and look at the small detail, and like, you know, it's a whole other world happening on like the microscopic level. But I think it's just I don't know, I just think that's how I like looking at things, and maybe I like, because of my interest in pattern, I look for that when I'm outside or doing whatever.
It makes sense. It makes sense. I mean, it makes me think that like you had some sort of like formative experience as a child, like, you know, like taking a rock and then seeing like the little bugs or something.
Yeah.
Whereas like, you know, somebody else might have that one memory of seeing like a vast, you know, like going to the, I don't know, the Grand Canyon with their folks.
Right.
That's something that I've always thought was like really fascinating about, you know, your approach to the natural world, how it's like very micro rather than macro. We haven't talked a lot about sort of the way you approach color. Talk a little bit about, you know, where the color comes from with these and how it's different from the plastic paintings
Right.
or the earliest
Mhm.
tile paintings.
Well, I think with these, I really tried to stay with a lot of naturalistic color. I love earth tones and like the combination of like this periwinkle blue and brown and very kind of, colors that we associate with nature. In the plastic pieces, I found that really challenging because, I think I lean more towards this like more subdued palette. But with the plastic pieces, I really wanted to make them seem garish and bright and in your face. But I think that's what attracted me to the plastic was the color. Sometimes when I'm working, I will try to surround myself with like paintings that I love or, fabric. I collect like different embroideries and little bits of fabric. And I think that sometimes just having that there, I'm not like making a color chart or anything when I start these paintings, but it just kind of seeps into the work.
By the way, folks, she does make color charts. There's one in that vitrine right there. That's very, very cool. Which makes me think we might want to hop over and see the second vitrine of work that was done alongside the paintings. Some of these before what we've seen. I'm not sure of the chronology of all of these, but you're obviously going to let us know.
Yes. So these were in both of the vitrines that are in the gallery. There's some objects that I've made, some drawings of mine, and also some things that just influence my work. So in this particular case, there's some tiles that I made. After I had actually finished the tile series and I was moving on to a series that was based on gardens, I had a residency at the Women's Studio Workshop in upstate New York. And the whole purpose of the residency was to learn how to make tiles. And so these are some of the pieces, and I was very interested in obviously repeating patterns. And the top three are relief tiles, and then these two yellow tiles were made using slip. And so I really enjoyed that process because I'd been looking at tiles so much in my work and thinking about pattern that it was really interesting to switch materials and actually try to make them. And I enjoyed it quite a bit, but as Michael mentioned, I think I'm really a painter and I like being the immediacy of paint. So it was a great experience, but I'll stick with painting for the time.
Yeah, that sort of mirrors my own experience at a print shop residency. It was so fascinating watching other people do great prints.
Right.
I find it very difficult to do my own. And sometimes you have to have those experiences to solidify the fact that,
right.
Indeed you are a painter.
Right.
Not just what you're comfortable doing, but why you came to painting in the first place.
Right.
Very, very cool.
So some of the other things in here, there are they're Guatemalan embroideries. They're just little samples. And, I like to collect little things. And I think, your question about color, sometimes by studying textiles or just like little scraps of wallpaper or wrappers or just small things, sometimes the palette from one of those influences can really affect an entire painting. So, I in particularly love these embroideries and just, both in terms of their floral embroidery and then also the color, which sometimes can, jolt me out of repetition of using the same colors in a painting or give me a new color palette. And then the bottom are just some drawings that I did. They are based on the paintings that we just looked at. They're just black and white line drawings, completed after I finished the paintings. But
that's important to know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people, just will automatically assume that drawings have to always come before
first,
paintings,
yeah.
but they can be responses to them for sure.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I have to be honest, I can't remember, did we go to the first vitrine
No, I don't
first? We should probably go to that one as well. Because this case shows a lot of similar, at least ideas, as the other one. We've got some other people's work.
Mm-hmm.
alongside some of your work, if you want to tell us about that.
Sure. Well, Michelle had the idea of putting these cases together because ultimately this is a teaching institution. And so part of this is to kind of show the process of, making these big paintings. So I have some of the tiles that have influenced me and that I've, held on to over the years. And so, here's a sketchbook with some color studies and just, trying out different colors, different orientations of the tile. And then these are some tiles that I've picked up over the years. This is a tile there's 2 tiles from Spain that they fit together, and an embroidery. So these are just some things this is an antique lace. It's not really embroidery, it's like lace making. But I love the way that the pattern, it's reflected, and it's also, it builds from this like skeleton, and it builds the pattern out. And then down at the bottom are some drawings of the puzzle works that I've done.
Yeah, even the drawings are so obviously labor intensive. Do you feel, or maybe I should say, did you feel at the time that when you finished these, it was absolutely necessary to do these before you, got to the paintings so that you kind of knew what you were doing?
Well, it's funny because I did these while I was working on these paintings.
Oh, wow.
So often I'll start a painting and it's like, then I have to take a break and take notes so that I know what I'm doing as I move forward. So these kind of came mid puzzle series.
That's funny because, and I don't know if you folks at home are going to be able to see this as well as we do, probably not. These drawings in some ways are like a lot more complicated than the paintings because of the sort of leveling they have that's similar to the Hanging Gardens.
Right.
That just dawned on me right now. So I guess that's why we like to see art multiple times, because you really do see a lot of different things in these. And I think partially that's because they are very rich, very complex. I feel like I have to ask you a pointed question. So if you showed up at your first day at Yale with a bunch of Mexican tiles, do you think you would have been laughed at? Do you feel like...
Well, that's how I left, so.
I mean, the reason I ask is that I know what I was like when I was 19, when I was 20. And I know we spoke about this a little bit earlier this afternoon. When it comes to influences, you've obviously had a lot of influence from, in a lot of cases, anonymous makers, people who made craft rather than quote unquote fine art. Do you feel that it just got easier and easier to sort of what's the phrase, to sort of shed some of your earlier influences that might have come from fine art and then become more into the sort of craft-based people?
I think so. I mean, I feel like I'm more comfortable working that way. I mean, I still, love looking at everything.
Sure.
But I think over the years, I feel like I've become more influenced by utilitarian objects. So like contemporary ceramics or functional, things, quilts, pottery. I think that has played very much into my work. And just, whether it's what I'm painting or how I'm painting it, like I like the tactile quality of these types of objects, and I want to bring that into the painting.
Indeed. So perhaps maybe we can cut right through the vitrines. Let me take a peek at this beautiful hanging. This is from the Hanging Gardens.
Yes.
Maybe this one, just because I really love these birds. And then some of the other puzzle pieces. Let's get a nice. I really love that. And folks at home, we are absolutely so happy to have Rosarta here doing some really lovely camera work. This would truly be impossible to do if I had a handheld device. So we are very thankful that she could be here to do this. And as well, while you're checking out this very large, this is what, 6 by 6 feet?
Yes.
Sort of like this luscious 36 square feet of painting. It would be, I've just lost my train of thought. Never mind. We'll look at this for a minute. I thought I had something really important to say, but maybe not. So if we talk about this piece here, it's enormous. This was done your last semester at school?
No, this was after I was in Jersey City. So
Oh, okay.
around 2000, 2001.
Okay, so still pretty old, but
Yeah.
not quite as old as that first tile piece.
Right.
We can see in this one, like a pretty marked difference from, the hanging gardens and the way that, the composition is set up. Take us a little bit through if you can remember the things that went through your mind at the time. Why did this one come out like this after you had done something that seemed more structurally, grid-like?
Well, this piece and the piece to our left were both part of a series called the Garden Series. And I think I wanted to
That's great.
get rid of such an obvious grid. Although there's a grid in both of these pieces, I wanted to move away from having such an obvious, grid laying out the pattern. I was thinking a lot about just rhythm and kind of this explosion of form. So the piece to the left is a little bit more structured, and this one's a little bit more like you're just looking up into this canopy of vines and flowers. But at the same time, there's, it's organized, even though it looks like it's kind of exploding in front of you. The grid is still there, but it kind of moves away from that a little bit.
I like that you just said it's like you're looking up into the canopy. I've never thought about that before. So many of these, you've mentioned that the puzzles, like, you're obviously looking down.
Right.
It's a little unclear in the hanging garden pieces, like the one that we just saw prior to this large one, whether you're seeing things straight on or down.
Right.
It just, it's an interesting thing for me to, get my whole sort of almost physical sense of balance, like reoriented when I'm looking at different pieces. That was obviously a conscious thing for you, right?
Yes. And I think that that's something, anytime you're thinking about pattern, it depends on the size of the surface that it's painted on. So if it's small, it gives you a certain feeling like maybe I'm looking down at something or looking into something. But the bigger the area, gives you room to spread out, and I think it amplifies the effect.
So, Rosarta, maybe we go over to that big guy there too. This is sort of the companion piece. How many of these works did you make of this size? Was it just these two, or were there others that?
There were 6 pieces in this series, so.
And they were all of this large.
This size, yes.
And would you say in some cases that, the flowers in these were nearly life size? Are you thinking about sort of a 1-to-1 scale for like a full juicy bloom?
I was thinking of, I guess I've always kind of imagined these being larger than life size, that somehow the viewer has become smaller and you're like lost in this tangle of garden.
So the puzzle pieces are 1-to-1. The plastic trash is at times 1-to-1, but then you're also playing with scale within the piece itself.
Right.
Sometimes like the shell or the small, I can't even think of what those things are, the little flossers.
Right.
that will be life size, but then like a shoe would be like maybe a slightly smaller than
Yeah.
life size.
Well, some of the shoes were my kids, so.
Oh, so
why they're
that's good.
kid
That's
shoes,
good
yeah.
to know. Yeah, so
Yeah.
like a size 8, but
Yeah.
child's. Yeah. But it's interesting that scale can. Let's see, how can I say this? Scale can be done in like 2 different ways at the same time.
Right.
A large painting full of small things. What would you call that? A medium-sized easel painting that is 1-to-1.
Right.
I had asked you earlier if you could imagine, painting an enormous, like a mural, like on the side of a building,
Right.
or something that like Mark Bradford did at the Hirshhorn in Washington, D.C., and you said, absolutely, yes.
I mean, I love making big paintings, and I love making big paintings filled with small things. So I think that, it would have to be really, really big for me to say no to it, but
Sure.
I just feel comfortable working on a large surface. Sometimes I find that the smaller the canvas, the more frustrating and the more difficult it is to accomplish, so.
Sure. Maybe it would seem too obvious to mention some artists that might have been influential to you that do somewhat the same thing. Working with like a lot of very small, very dense information in a large space.
Right.
People at home might be interested to know, like, some of the artists or just makers in general that you were influenced by or you just really loved that no one would ever guess. Like maybe I'm trying to think of like a minimalist.
Well,
that really flipped your wig, right?
The funny thing is that we took a trip with students here, maybe it was a year ago, to Dia Beacon, and I loved the minimalist sculpture. It was just such a, it's so different from what I do, so I really enjoyed it, and it was something that I really, really enjoyed. And I think it's just a break from what you do all the time in the studio. And, having that opportunity to see the work so different. I really came to it with like fresh eyes and enjoyed it.
Interesting. Very interesting. I think now would be a perfect time for you folks to start typing into the chat.
Okay.
And this is really the first time we've done this. So if you want to give us those questions in the chat, and then either Michelle, who's off screen, or Rosarta, who's doing anything, will give us the questions, and then we'll try to answer them as best we can. Ooh, these are pretty nice. I like it.
So we have a question from Monica Cisnowski. You've had a really great feed through all this, and
Great.
Everybody's been saying really nice things, just so you know.
Awesome.
That's really good.
That's good.
No, it's a good group of people, and they're very giving. So Monica asks, in some of the work, there's almost a suggestion of looking through a screen akin to a Moroccan courtyard. Any inspiration or influence from Islamic art?
Absolutely. I love Islamic tile, and Michael and I have talked about this at length, that years ago I had an opportunity to do a residency in Spain, and I was really influenced by patterns that I saw in the tile work and at places like the Alhambra. So there's definitely an inspiration from that vein of work.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes without saying that everything that everyone associates with Spain, Portugal,
Right.
all of that's Islamic.
Right.
Because it's 1300 years old.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we have a question from Mana.
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about? Okay. Any favorite flower in particular that sparked your interest in your Eternal Bloom series?
Interesting. Well, I have to say, I don't necessarily think I've painted it, but we have a jasmine plant at my house, and it produces the sweetest smelling flowers that you could ever imagine. It's the jasmine that they use to make perfume. So I think That's maybe my favorite flower, but I don't have a direct.
And those flowers
painting
are
of it.
actually fairly small too, right?
Yeah, there's different types of jasmine, but this one is like, kind of looks like a rose shape. But I would say that's my favorite.
Okay, I'm trying to get to the questions.
We're getting a lot of questions.
Yeah,
Okay.
all right, okay, enough of the questions. Okay. This one is from Karina Vargas,
Okay.
and she says, what gave you the confidence to paint on a larger scale? Or did you always prefer larger scale artwork instead of smaller? Larger scale seems to be intimidating.
That's interesting because I think I love to paint. So bigger canvas gives me more room to spread out. And, I just think that, if it was up to me, I would be making all, 6 by 6 foot paintings, but I didn't find it intimidating. And in fact, I think that, when you are working on a big surface, it gives you room to move around. So you could be working on a certain area, move somewhere else, or, it just allows yourself a little bit more space. Sometimes small canvases, I feel really kind of trapped in the small space.
Okay. This one is from Des Moines.
Okay.
We both know Des Moines.
Des Moines.
Hi, Des Moines. Okay. How do you stay motivated when making pieces like these? Is there any challenges you face and eventually find a way to overcome it?
Well, I would, we kind of dealt with this. We had an earlier talk. But I think that every painting is a challenge. And if the painting goes too well, I'm suspicious of it because I feel like, I'll get started. I'm very excited to start a new painting. And then about 3/4 of the way through, it gets really hard. And, making decisions how you're going to finish something or if it looks right or, I think it's, I always need a little bit of a push, or I push myself at that point to really, see it through and finish it. So, and I think it's just when you really love doing something, you have to just keep coming back to it, or at least I do. I can't, if there's something that's bothering me about a painting, even if everyone I know says, oh, it looks fine, but if it's bothering me, I have to come back to it. So, I think that's just.
I'm going to
how a lot of
cheat and
artists
ask
work.
a question.
Okay.
So I know what I love about your work is, and I always say this to people, is that like for me, it's about how your hand is able to control in such like, it's just unbelievable. Like, and how you, in a painting, if you decide that the painting is going to be like a little pixelated, or if the painting is going to be, you actually have control over that, which I find amazing because, and how do you keep that with also applying emotion? Like, do you ever question, like, do you stop? Like, do you have days where, you're like in the morning, you're like, I just can't paint. Like, is it in that, or like, how?
I think that's a part of it. I think that you have to be in the right mindset, obviously. But it's just sometimes if things are too easy, or if I don't know, it's like if it just comes out, it just doesn't look right. So I think there is a little bit of a mindset. You have to be very focused. And sometimes I feel like, I always feel like I have to be in the studio for hours on end, but maybe you have a burst of painting where you work for a really productive hour, and then it's just time to get away and do something else.
Okay, so that's spurred on another question by Paula Serrano. Do you ever go into a painting without a plan, or do you always have a sketch? Do you always sketch out an idea beforehand?
That's a good question.
That's a good question. I agree. I tend to have a plan when I first start the painting, but by the end of the painting, it's like the plan has totally changed. So, I think I have an idea, I'll have a sketch, but I try to make sure that I let the process take place so that, I might have a certain color scheme or a certain type of imagery, but as I'm working on it, then different needs arise and I deal with it. And, I think that it just changes as you work through the painting. So, and I always have this idea of what I think it's going to look like. And then when I see the painting, when I'm finished, it doesn't look anything like what I was envisioning. So,
okay. So Joshua Jordan writes, the Hanging Garden series reminds me of a fractured interior design.
Okay.
Like wallpapered walls breaking apart.
Mm-hmm.
Were you influenced at all by the interiors and spaces that you grew up in?
Interesting. That's a good question, Josh. We didn't have any wallpaper, and my parents were very set on all the walls were always white, and they were perfectly white. So it wasn't really any reaction to that, I don't think. But you know, I don't know.
It makes me wonder if like this sort of like horror vacui,
maybe
having everything is a rebellion against the
that,
Spartan white walls of your upbringing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think it was really in relation to that, but it's obvious. Wallpaper is obviously something I'm interested in, and you know, I love the story of the yellow wallpaper.
Yeah, me too. I was thinking that.
You know, so that was, it's always been an influence.
I'm nodding my head, but I have no idea what that's.
Oh yeah, we had to read that in school, and I
Yeah.
was thinking that the yellow wallpaper as you're talking. So
A woman basically, she's recovering from having, I believe she's had a baby, and I might be totally off point here, but she's recovering, and her husband has her on bed rest, and she starts to look into the wallpaper, and it starts to change, and you know, she starts to see figures crouching in the wallpaper, and it's a kind of, you know, Gothic story of a descent into madness.
Sounds like an Oliver Sacks article I've read. Yeah.
So this question is from William Stamos.
Okay.
What direction do you see your paintings going in the near future?
Okay. Good question. Well, I'm continuing on with the plastic imagery. What I'm working on now kind of has some puzzle imagery and plastic imagery and images from actual landscapes. So, you know, I would like to continue in that vein. As I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, I always love painting beautiful things, but you know, just in the past few years, I think I've really come to the point where I want to, you know, maybe tackle some world issues with my work. So kind of bring, you know, that more into it.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's funny because I still consider these environmental. You know,
Yeah.
I feel like you're really beauty and the environment, like in
Right.
nature, has always been a thing
Right.
for you. So it just makes
It's just
sense.
an extension of that.
All right, so there's a good one in here. Okay, how do you balance your artistic practice with working and family? That's from Monica.
Okay.
Yeah. How much
Monica's,
time do we have, right?
I know.
We have like about 5 minutes.
Well, that's a really good question, and it's something that I talk about endlessly, but I don't ever think there's really a balance. You know, I think that it's always just kind of focusing on what needs to be done, and you know, I think really was really brought to the forefront with the pandemic, where you know, my studio's at my house, my kids are at my house, my work is now at my house, and so all the lines of separation on, and I think it's just, you know, dealing with, there's always going to be a hierarchy of importance, and you know, just trying to like do the best in whatever situation I'm in, and really, you know, try to do my best work, whether it's being an artist or being a teacher or mother or whatever. So just depending on the situation, just giving it my all. So.
Absolutely, and you do. Okay, and then we could do one more question or two, if you, like we have one
Maybe
more.
two more if we
Okay.
can.
Yeah.
Okay,
Why not?
so
Okay.
how long does it take to finish a painting like the one behind you?
Okay. It just depends on the painting, really. It doesn't necessarily depend on the size of it. Sometimes the big paintings go faster than the small paintings. I think it has to do with the level or the intensity of the detail in the painting. You know, and I try not to worry about it too much. I just think it's going to take as long as it's going to take, and you know, I'll know when it's done. So, I mean, I believe these took a couple months. Some of the puzzle work took almost a year. So it just really depends on what I'm working on.
Okay. Something came in.
Yeah, this is a good question.
Yeah, I'm trying to get to it.
Hot off the presses. I really love
These
this.
questions, they're good. Okay, can you get to it? Because I can't get to it. Okay. Oh my goodness, this is so small. Oh, it's Katie, yay. Fantastic conversation, thinking about kaleidoscopes, patterns, shallow spaces, puzzles. Do you use digital photo editors to prepare and push the composition in advance of the paintings?
I really don't. It's not something I do. I will sketch and do little watercolor studies, but it's always been something that I've thought about doing, but I just haven't done that. I've tried to work digitally more recently, and
Do you feel that it's because of so many other people doing it, or that because you're a teacher and so many of your students do, or just what?
I just think I just prefer working with my hands and paint
Sure.
and the materiality of the paint.
OG.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a very conscious.
Yeah.
You could, but you're definitely not going to because you just.
I won't say never.
Sure.
But,
I mean, I think that's smart. Yeah.
I just haven't. It hasn't really played an important part up until this point.
You want one more? Or
Sure.
I could answer questions all night long, but I know that
It's 4:20. I mean, it's 4:20. It's like 4 minutes.
maybe we should take one more question and then cap it there. So let's pull up a real goodie.
No trick questions, please.
Can you go down more? I think we answered one. Wait, do you think we're?
This is the last question that we.
Okay. We asked this one already?
No.
Oh, I think we did. What direction do you see your paintings going in the future? Did we ask that one?
Yes.
We did.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. There was one in here that I can't find. It's like there's so many questions coming through, where they talked about, how have you trained yourself to paint so meticulously? Like, how, was it always natural, or can you talk about that a little bit?
That's a good question.
Yeah, it was from a student, Paula Serrano.
Okay.
I'm retextualizing it.
Okay. I've just always loved to paint. So I think it's just my nature. I love small details. I love intricacy. And so I think it just comes through my work that way because I love doing it. I've always done it that way. So hopefully I just keep getting better at it. And, it's just something that, it's a lot of hard work and it is what it is. So.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, don't let the fact that we love this mean that it's not hard, right?
Right.
It is so much work. I totally understand the 3/4 of the way through wanting to, get a job at the post office.
Right.
It can be very grueling.
Yeah.
I think perhaps we should wrap that up. Laurie, thank you very much for doing this. And thanks also to Michelle for making this series happen. I think this is a terrific thing to do. I'm really hoping that we can continue this and do it even more IRL as the days and months ahead will allow. I should make a plug now for everyone. Next month, what is it, February, right? Next month, Friday, March 12th, I'm going to be with the artist Donté K who is, if I'm not mistaken, a Georgia transplant to Jersey City. So we'll be talking about his work. He does 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional work, and that should be a lot of fun. We won't be in the same space, like I've had the pleasure of being here with. It'll be a more traditional Zoom meeting where everyone is remote. But stuff. But Laurie, thank you so much, and I hope that everyone can see this show for real sooner than later. Okay.
This show's up through June, so hopefully, by then maybe we'll have more
We'll see.
more opportunities.
Okay.
Great, thank you, Michael.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Welcome, everybody, to Hudson Presents, Conversations with Contemporary Artists. This program is brought to you by the Department of Cultural Affairs at Hudson County Community College in Jersey City, not too far from where Donté now calls home. Yep. So the Department of Cultural Affairs and the Deneen Hull Gallery are basically, run by a wonderful woman, Michelle Vitale, who got this thing started and said, "Hey, Michael, you should do a great show. Here are the keys." And so that's why I'm here. So I'm Michael Lee. Welcome. Thanks for coming. And tonight I have a really cool guest. I think you would bill yourself as a multimedia artist, if I'm not mistaken. I think I saw your sculpture first and then realized, oh, you do drawings and prints and then use the sculpture in installation sort of things. But below me in the grid, at least I think that's how people see this, is Donté K. Hayes. So please help me welcome Donté K. Hayes.
Represent.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael, for having me.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Donté.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
Michelle,
It's
as well.
a real pleasure.
I'm excited to be a part of this and getting to meet new people and all the new community of New Jersey.
Absolutely. So let me introduce Donté a little bit by way of his achievements. I was saying earlier, my dad's going to love a small part of this. Donté Hayes graduated summa cum laude from Kennesaw State University in Georgia. And I'm reading off a cue card now, so my eyes are going to look a little wall-eyed. With a BFA in ceramics and printmaking and an art history minor. He later went and got a master's in art history, as well as getting a master's in studio art at the University of, wait for this, Dad, University of Iowa, and is the 2017 recipient of the University of Iowa Arts Fellowship. Recent exhibitions include, and this is, guys, this is like 3 of like 30, the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, the Trout Museum of Art in Appleton, Wisconsin, and then just really this year, the ATL Biennial at the Atlanta Contemporary in Georgia. His work, I think, newly included in the permanent collections of the Renwick Gallery, which is the sort of crafts gallery or section of the Smithsonian Museum of American Art in DC. Also in the permanent collection of the Gibbs Museum of Art in Charleston, South Carolina, and the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, Texas, where my folks lived for many years. He's represented by Mindy Solomon Gallery in Miami, and he has won many prizes, been given many awards. I think you guys are going to be listening to a fellow who's going to be really on a lot of radars in the next decade. I think you will hear his name come up quite a bit. That's just my own prognosis. And then he wanted me to tell you folks that upcoming, he'll be in a show called Revision and Respond at the Newark Art Museum in New Jersey from June 17th to August 22nd. So that's sort of coming up. It's his first show in the great state of New Jersey.
I'm excited about that.
So welcome, Donté, and I hope I said all the things that I needed to say.
Thank you so much.
Great to have you on the show.
Yeah, it's great. This is going to be fun.
So I think I first saw your ceramics, and I thought, like, is this guy a ceramics artist?
Right.
Or does he do what? And then I looked at your website. I was like, oh, okay. Blah,
And while
blah,
you're talking, Michael, I'm going to just slide this so that people can see some of the work.
Yeah, of course.
While you talk.
But if anybody else ventured to look at your website, they obviously saw, the whole kit and caboodle. But I was thinking, like, I guess the same thought I have of a lot of artists, 3-dimensional stuff, takes more space. In a lot of ways, it takes more time. There are certain skills and just, tools and so forth.
Kilns.
Yeah. Did you always want to do ceramics? Like, what's your history with the medium?
Yeah. I didn't even start undergrad until my 30s. And I only reason why I took a ceramics class is because I needed it for my drawing and printmaking major that I was doing. And I took the class because like you needed a 3D class. And I was like, well, I never touched clay. The closest thing I ever touched clay was Play-Doh, and I always wanted to work in clay because all my work is based on research. It's not based on because I love clay or I love print, because I've been doing printmaking for a while. When I was 18, 19, I was doing posters and prints for rap artists in Atlanta. So
wow.
Criss Cross, Ludacris, Jermaine Dupri, and things like that. So that's how I was like making my money, and then started to like make paintings on tar paper, and then that's how people started to know me in Atlanta. But so in my 30s, I was like, well, I need to go to school. I felt like I wanted to learn things I didn't know, and I guess I was ready, because in high school I was not a good high school student, but in college I was ready to go to school then, because I was in my 30s. So I ended up, getting straight A's in math and science, all those other kind of classes that I wasn't really interested in, but in high school, but I was so into it when I was older. So I took the Ceramics 1 class from Jeff Campana, and he changed my life. He really did. Especially because I didn't think I would be good at it, because I was like also trying to find something that was like a medium that I knew nothing about, that would be hard. And working in clay is super hard. Even when you know so much about it, you still know so little. So he was so shocked that I never touched clay before. He assumed that I did because of the work I was making. I was like coming up with like one of the first pieces I made was a boom box that actually could play music out of clay. That was like I should have. Yeah.
Wow.
So like everyone was like so shocked, like how well technical I was able to do things. I could like make wherever I wanted. I would draw it and it would look just like it. And so he was like, man, you should really continue this. And so I didn't take another ceramic class till a year later. And that's when I was like, wow, maybe I should do this and start actually. If you go on my website, actually, you could see. If you go on the Instagram, you can actually see that boombox. And like I said, it plays music from your phone. It has a
Wow.
a Bluetooth in it. And I did that in 2015. So I stayed at school for an extra year, and that's how I ended up getting that art history minor, because I stayed an extra year so I could learn more about ceramics. And that's the only reason why I took the class, because I needed it, not because I even knew anything about it.
That's so crazy. And I'll try to remember, as I'm asking you this one question, to double back and re-ask a question that I had that we had talked about right before we came on.
Yeah, but I do want to mention, I
go
kind
ahead.
of see my ceramic work as like 3-dimensional prints, because like as I was painting to show you the work, the texture, this is, and the coloring is all from actually the clay. There is no glaze on any of these pieces. And I get this texture just from like a needle tool, just as if I was doing an etching on a copper plate. So I always see these as like 3-dimensional prints. So that's probably the reason why my work resonates with so many people, because they, first of all, don't even realize it's ceramic. And then they're shocked when it's the clay body. I'm not using glaze. And then how I do my surface, I'm not doing it a surface that ceramic people would do.
I mean, I think that's a real ace in the hole, right? To go into a medium that you don't have any familiarity with,
Right.
and therefore do things that a lot of people, you can't do that.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
And then you do it, and well, obviously you either fail
and you failed majorly.
But I think, maybe you're just the luckiest guy in the world to have like been married to this form.
Mm-hmm.
And like right away, you knew that there was a fit. I mean, that doesn't happen all the time.
Well, I think it has a lot to like the research, because like the work speaks to the idea of what it feels like to be welcomed. I started making this work in 2017. Of course, it didn't look like this. It was very crude, not until 2018 is when you would say that it looks like what some of the images will show later in our conversation.
Sure.
And as like your father, who went to the University of Iowa as well, I started in 2017, but it was weird for me because I was the only Black person I usually saw walking the streets. So I never really felt welcomed in the space there. And like even
Sure.
critiques, I was told I should be doing making watermelons. I shouldn't be doing, this is critiques, that you should be proud of your Blackness. You should be making work about you being Black.
Oh
And
my
these are,
God, it's like, I'm sorry, there's only one
yeah,
Betty Saar, you know?
exactly. And this is coming from white students. These are not from my cohort. There was no Black students in my cohort. And well, they were in, I'm drawing and painting, two of them, but they weren't in ceramics. So it was like, and so it was like deep to like come to a space and not feel welcomed in the space. So it started to make me think about what it feels like to be welcome and what does that look like.
Right. Well, that is pretty intense, man.
Yeah. So this is where the work is coming from.
Yeah. So folks out there in the ether, Donté and I were talking a little bit earlier about growing up in Atlanta, and everyone knows, if they're from the South, how hot it gets down there. And what do you do as a kid? You go jump in the pool. You go to the water park. Well, not Donté.
No.
Apparently, his folks took him to Civil War battlefields.
Yes.
Monticello.
Yeah.
Harper's Ferry.
Yeah. We didn't do anything fun.
But isn't it funny how, like, you might grumble as like a 9-year-old,
Yeah.
you realize this is the best damn thing that ever happened to me when you're 40.
Yeah. Now I'm like, that's my work. Like all those different experiences that I had, like when I was like 19, making posters and CD covers for famous hip hop artists, and then my 30s, I was actually now ready to actually go to school, and then so all that knowledge that I had about graphic design and printmaking came, and then learning ceramics, and then applying all that knowledge and history that I got when I was younger in high school and middle school, and now I create my work. So it's like, now when people always ask, like, how long does it take you to make the work? Now I would say 2 answers. One, it took all of my life to create this.
Sure.
Second, it may have taken like 2 hours to make the form, but it might have took me 16 hours to make that texture.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the surface embellishment, or what do they call that? Surface incident.
Yeah, right.
It's pretty astounding. I mean, without it, I think the form would be naked.
Yes.
It would seem maybe more generally modernist. And I think having that sort of texture, it brings in some element of culture that I can't put a finger on, but it seems highly specific.
Yes.
Even if it's not a specificity that I would know. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah. I guess I can share my screen and show you some of like the things I'm thinking about in imagery.
Yeah, absolutely.
Coming from, since that was a great segue. And like growing up, I was a big science fiction fan. And so like when everybody was like talking about Black Panther, like now, and Afrofuturism and things of that nature, it was not cool when I was young. Black Panther was like the fake Batman to most people when I was younger. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's how I learned how to draw, was through like comic books, looking at like Jack Kirby and the way he did his inking and things like that. So, and also it was really empowering seeing a Black man and in the future doing something positive, not doing something negative. And so many times in like comic books and cartoons and like science fiction TV show and science fiction books, you never really saw that many people of color.
Sure.
So that always like resonates in my work, thinking about like science fiction. But I want to just move this down some. So like this piece here, the Maasai warrior headdress. This is where a lot of the work is coming from, the African diaspora. These are, because I'm always thinking about like headdresses and things of that nature. And I wanted to, and in and in West Africa, where many of the enslaved Africans actually came from, and so like Ghana, Nigeria, and the Ivory Coast, they have initiations. And in these initiations, you would know by the way they dress, with raffia and things of that nature, and the headdresses, you would know what they mean. And so like, just as if I'm a big Lakers fan, so like if you saw someone wearing yellow and purple, you would automatically think of like Kobe Bryant, LeBron James,
Sure.
Magic Johnson. So the same thing for someone that was in Nigeria. If they saw someone wearing a certain kind of headdress, they knew that that was a boy becoming a man, or a girl becoming a woman. So like, I'm thinking about that because I feel like that's really welcoming, that you already know where your space is and your place is just by the way you're dressed, only.
Sure.
So this is the reason why I came up with this piece, and it's called Womb. And I was thinking something futuristic in it, just because like that image of that Maasai warrior looked like his head was coming out of a womb. That's what I was thinking.
That's wow, yeah.
Right? Isn't that crazy, Michael? So
That's so cool that, I mean, I would not have thought that,
right,
probably because, if I ever said that, I feel like I will be slapped by somebody.
right,
But,
right.
But I mean, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, so I was thinking something like, even though it has like it alludes to like the African diaspora, alludes to something in the past, but it also looks futuristic. Because I was thinking, if we really wanted to change this world and change the systematic racism and sexism and homophobia and all these different negative things that are happening in our societies, we have to start all over. We're going to have to just be just like a womb, coming out and re-beginning a new birth. We need to really start from scratch. So that's what I was thinking about when I made this piece. And this is like 20 inches tall.
These things have a lot of power. I mean, they're pretty short when it all comes down to
Yes.
brass tacks, but oof, they really kind of like off gas, like a sense of power.
Mhm.
You must have known that from like the very first one you made.
Yeah.
They're icon like.
Yes, they're very, yeah. And I was thinking that because like being in spaces and you're maybe the only Black or brown person in a space, you're very vulnerable, So I was thinking a lot about like being vulnerable and being in this space. And so even though they may only be at the tallest 20 inches tall, they still feel monumental. They feel like this thing is here and it's not going anywhere. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like something that you may not know where it's all coming from, but you feel that energy, you feel this positive power that it alludes to. So like this piece here is very recent. It's actually right now at the Atlanta Biennial show. And I made it at the Hambidge Center, which is amazing residency in Raven Gap, Georgia. And like while I was there, it's super dark there. It's like in the mountains. And you have your iPhone and you have the flashlight, Michael. No, that's not gonna help. So you're gonna need the real, like the ones you have to put the big battery in.
Oh, like the
Real flashlight.
spelunking
Yeah,
kind of. Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
because like you could not see nothing there. So I made this piece thinking, and it's called Lantern. And I was like thinking also about my love of comic books and the Black Green Lantern, John Stewart. And like I was thinking about like, what is it like to make work when no one cares? You know what I mean? You got to make that light that comes out of you. You got to be that lantern. Can you be that lantern when no one cares or understands what you're making? And I think we all can feel that as artists, and creative people, or just living this life. Can people understand where we're coming from when you're the only one that looks like you or thinks like you?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, let me throw you a zinger. Why abstraction?
Great. I decided at first I wasn't doing abstraction. I was doing more figurative work.
Yeah.
As well as like some of my prints are very figurative. They use Ife heads to speak about the past, present, and future. But I started to think in 2018 that I wanted all my work to be abstract because I wanted it to be universal. I didn't want you to like automatically think, oh, because he's black, he's talking about blackness. Yes, of course I'm black. So of course I'm going to talk about black. That's what I know, you know. But when I look at some person's work that's white, I don't think they're talking about whiteness or being white. They're talking about the universal. We all know what it feels like to being in a room and then you come in and everyone stops talking and stops like snarking and starts laughing. You know, you can always know what it feels like to be welcome in a space or unsure and vulnerable in a space. We don't have to be black or marginalized or have mental health issues to feel that way. We all can feel that. So I'm really speaking about the universal human experience. And I thought the best way to do that is through abstraction.
It's kind of cool because it makes me think of, you know, even if it was with 100 years sort of hindsight, maybe flat-footed, a lot of these Europeans were, you know, from literally from places that don't exist anymore, you know,
Right.
because of both of the world wars. And then, I mean, and from other conflicts after that. But, you know, from Brancusi to, oh geez, Kandinsky
Yes, yes.
and the Delaunay husband and wife, and you know, like the list goes on and on and on. This idea that, you know, somehow modernism was going to save the world,
Right.
you know, that it was going to be this universal language like, you know, Esperanto. But you know, so much of its, I guess you could say its failure was a big part of what was going on and sort of like in the air when I was in maybe undergrad, you know, in the
Right.
really early 90s. And that just also happened to coincide with what, you know, people were calling at the time, which is a really kind of idiotic term, like, you know, like identity politics, because I mean, give me a break, right? It's like all politics are about identity,
Right.
and identity is inherently political. So
Political.
it's like, you know, you just throw it out.
So
But
true.
like you were saying about, you know, the people not giving you such a fantastic reception, to say the least, in Iowa.
But I felt like that could be anywhere. It just happened to be there.
Yeah,
you
of
know?
course.
So I don't ever want to say like it's Iowa people. It's just that it was so weird because like at the University of Iowa, I also taught classes. I was not just a TA, I was an instructor of record there. And many of my students were always like so like glad that they were being taught by me. And they would be like, I am so thankful. I love your class. And I was like, why? It's like, it's so weird. You're the first Black teacher I ever had, and I'm in my 20s now. You know, so that was always weird. What if I was a jerk? What if I was a kind of jerk kind of person? You know what I mean? That was the first time, you know what I mean? Like a Black man in of authority that wasn't just Obama that they see on TV, but actually someone that they can hold and touch and actually know their name and actually can like text and like be emailed back and forth as I am the so-called professor in the room. And I was their first person that was of color, that was someone of leadership to them. That's deep to me.
It's a wonderful opportunity for them, and you know, and it obviously points to, you know, obvious, you know, systemic inequity,
Yes.
that it would be, you know, just you or like you and one other person.
Yep.
I work for, when I'm not teaching, I work for a fella doing art handling who's, you know, the other Black person in Iowa. And he's always sporting the Hawkeye cap himself. But he said that he was from a town, I think in, Eastern Iowa.
Okay.
And he said, you know, like his town was, you know, there are plenty of Black people, but, you know, it definitely felt more or less segregated. And of course, you know, he's called Brooklyn his home for a long time, and he just recently moved upstate. But where am I going with that? Just this idea that, you know, if the default identity, right,
Yeah.
is like white, then, you know, identity politics are always going to be, you know, the default is always going to be like something, you know, identity politics is always going to be non-white. You
Right.
know, and therefore easier for people to get their hackles up about like, oh, is that a thing?
Mhm.
And it makes me think of the fights that like Jack Whitten,
Right.
who's, for those of you who don't know, Jack Whitten recently passed away, but is a, you know, African-American sculptor, painter. I mean, just one of the most amazing American artists, I think, ever. But he was really on his soapbox about being involved with abstract art specifically.
Yes.
I mean, really beat the drum. And I think it's telling that
Mhm.
other people really felt the opposite,
Yep.
and other Black artists too, you know?
True. I always had an affinity to abstraction and minimalism. That's the reason why, like, a lot of people are like, your work is just like either Black or you use the porcelain, so it's white, you know. And I always tell them, like,
Jeez.
I'm not, you know, but I'm using white in a different way. I'm seeing white not as about idea of purity or enlightenment. I see it as death, because of I'm thinking about, because like that this piece right here, it kind of looks like coral, if you can see. I don't
Right.
know. Can you see this? That the white one?
Yeah, I can now.
Yeah. So it kind of looks like coral, but yet it looks also like hair, and also looks like raffia. And when I made this piece, this is and I made a bunch of porcelain pieces. And this is way before the Black Lives Matter movement of this summer, when like Breonna Taylor and George Floyd died. But when I made that, started thinking about those pieces, I was thinking about those slave ships and the Middle Passage, and like, so how some that were Black, they jumped overboard because they didn't want to be a part of being subjugated, while there were some who were pushed over because of they weren't going to be healthy enough to make it through all the way to the United States or the Caribbean or South America. Or thirdly, the captains threw them overboard because they didn't have enough food for the whole trip. So like that made me think about like those beautiful people were on those ships, and then they were thrown overboard and their life is taken, and they're now with the coral. And you know, when coral dies, it's no longer colorful, it turns white.
Right,
So
bleached.
yeah, so they bleached. So I started thinking about that, to use porcelain to speak on that. And then Black Lives Matter came, and then it started to come to the idea of like, the only time you see a Black person's humanity is through their death. That's the only time that they speak, is in their death, not in their life. Like, why do I need to know Breonna Taylor's? I should know her life. I should not know her for the tragedy of what happened to her. So
Yeah,
so like when now people see the work, they're like, usually, especially in ceramics, the first thing they think of when everyone wants to use porcelain because it's pristine. But I'm like switching that idea, especially also because my work speaks to the African diaspora. And if you go to any in Eastern cultures, the color white is a symbol of ignorance and death, while in the Western culture, it's a symbol of purity and enlightenment. So I'm switching.
so strange how that turned around.
Yeah, so I'm even trying to change that in the way that we even see how porcelain is so considered so beautiful.
Right. Well, the same is true also of the color Black, no?
Mm-hmm.
Just like vastly different associations from East, West,
Yes.
and then, I mean, all over sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah, true.
Maybe two questions in one. So you were saying, like, growing up, you were really more involved with like two-dimensional stuff.
Yes.
You weren't like a tinkerer, like a 3D kind of like playing with things.
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, I was always into Legos. You know, we all were doing the Legos, making the Star Wars
Okay.
Legos, you know, Millennium Falcons and things of that nature.
Sure.
But I never really, right? But I never really saw, and you know, we were always making forts and things of that nature in this, you know, in the yard back. And a friend of ours, in their backyard, they had a lot of greenery and trees, and we always, and his dad had a bunch of like extra wood that we would always like mess around and make like little tree houses and stuff. So, you know, I never even thought about
handy.
that. Yeah. So I never even thought about that as being creative. You know what I mean? Like, only thing that I thought that was being creative and being an artist was drawing, you know, because we were kids, you know.
Right.
everybody was like, if you can draw, you can draw me. That means you're a really good drawer. So like that was like the thing, like, you know, if you could draw people when you're a kid.
It is interesting that you mentioned that, because I feel, you know, pencils are so easy to come by, right?
Yep.
And paper, and therefore maybe it would make sense that drawing becomes the default. You know, this is the thing that you could be good at, and maybe if you're good at that, you could be an artist. And sculpture, who was it? I think Ad Reinhardt, who said, like, you know, sculpture is the thing that you back into accidentally when you're looking at a painting.
Painting, right.
And you know, hardy har har.
Right.
But sculpture is so much more direct.
Yes.
It's a real thing
Yes.
that you can actually bump into.
Yeah. And look all the way around. And I
Yeah.
love that about three-dimensional work, because that's the reason why, like I said, that's the reason why I started, because I wanted to make something that felt welcoming, and I couldn't do that through printmaking. So that's the reason why I started working in ceramics, because I wanted something that it was tangible, and I wanted something that was a texture that felt welcoming. Like all these different things, I don't want my work to feel like trauma. I want my work to feel aesthetically pleasing and beautiful, because there's so much beauty in life too. So, and like, I want it to be nuanced.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you don't get any, yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. You know, it makes me think about the sort of like the generational sort of infighting of, like, you know, Black artists who've done really well for themselves, and therefore have, you know, they have an available soapbox, you know, the Betty Sars of the world, the Jack Whittons, Michael Ray Charles, different folks that either go one way or the other way and are really committed to representations. I feel like it's definitely, you know, art world's certainly big enough for people who are still doing color filled painting, right? So, you know, why not make room at the table for artists who are non-white that can do abstraction, and artists who are non-white that gravitate towards, like, you know, not only figuration, but things that, you know, inhabit, you know, narrative.
Yeah. And also, I kind of feel like also this work also kind of alludes to the Black body. It's actually very, you know, fleshy, and you know, in a lot of ways too. And it feels like the body, how the body moves. Because I was thinking about that, you know, like even the way that, because of COVID, we can't hug anymore. Can't even shake people's hands. So like, you know, and I was making this work before there was COVID, and now it's like I even take into an even higher like level that is like really speaking to the present day. Like, will we ever again shake people's hands? Ever again?
I know it does seem like there might be some. I mean, I sincerely hope not, but I feel like there's going to be some new normals that I'm not going to be happy with.
Yes.
Wow. Now this might point to my ignorance, but, you know, when I think of, you know, East or West or way down South, when it comes to sub-Saharan African art, I don't think of ceramics.
No. And then the artists that do ceramics in like Nigeria, Ghana, and Burkina Faso, they're all women. Women are the ones to actually are the people that make the pots. The men bring the clay to them.
Oh, wow. I mean, it is very heavy. But, you know, the reason I ask is that obviously you're not making African art.
No.
But you do have a lot of influence that sort of like comes from that way. Why, you know, again, it may seem like I'm asking the same question over and over. Like, there's something about ceramics that you just love, but like, what about, you know, the tradition in woodworking? What about, you know, things that, like, you know, actually using the raffia? I mean, that comes up a little bit in some of your installation work, right?
Yes, it does. I use a lot of tar paper in the work when I create the spaces for the ceramic pieces. I might like wrap a whole pedestal in tar paper that it will like resemble raffia. The work is like also like referencing hair, and that's personal to me. And for a lot of reasons. One, because like my mom, she has mental health issues, and she pulls her hair out. And ever since I was young, I would come home from school or come home from like track or basketball practice, and like some of my friends would come so they can have like dinner with us, and they would be like seeing like hair on the table, on the kitchen table. They're like, oh my gosh, there's hair here. And I never felt like that was a negative. I always felt like that was beautiful because I knew my mom was there and she was safe, so
Oh, wow. Yeah.
yeah. So, but also I love mystery and those sci-fi like NCIS shows where they do the forensics and like, how do people find people, right?
Right.
I don't
It's
have
like,
that much
I
hair.
found mom.
I know, but they find people through their hair. I don't have much hair now, but that's how people find. So it was like that always struck to me. And then thirdly, like, even though I'd never been to Africa, like, but my DNA comes from there. So
Sure.
like that also spoke to me. So I wanted to make the work, all those different things. So texture played a major part, like raffia, hair, and just the way that hair moves in space. It's like the wave in people's hair.
Sure.
So even that's what you can see a lot in the work too, like that wave in the work. So I'm thinking about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at these, it seems obvious enough that when you say their bodies, I think to myself, yeah, sure, bodies. I think initially, and maybe it was because I viewed one specific piece first, and that sort of set the tone for the rest. I was thinking of heads more than anything.
Mhm.
And when you think of heads, obviously you're thinking more of hair.
Yes,
Um,
headdresses and things of that nature as well.
yeah, of course. Yeah, like heads and the things that we put on them, but like, the choice to make a portrait that's like a portrait of a head. Yeah, exactly. Rather than like the whole body. Um, but it seems like, as we look at more of these, it really goes back and forth quite a bit between
Yeah.
more like a head and more like a body.
Can you see this, Michael?
I see you now.
Okay, because I was like trying to show like this one piece that might explain what you were saying.
Yeah, I think if you just reshare the screen there.
Okay. But yeah, see here.
There we go.
Okay, you see it now? See my screen now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And there's one piece I wanted, especially you're talking about some of the older work. So like the first piece was actually coming from science fiction, the Dalek, which is like the anti-character in Doctor Who. And this is where like the ideas was coming from. Because I always felt like, they were like exterminate, and like they would go to time and space, and they would go to all different other cultures and planets to take over other races they thought that was deemed lesser than they did. And I felt like that's the reason what I wanted to show in my work. And I thought it was interesting because like their bodies had like that bulbous shape. And like every time I think of a bulbous shape, I also think of like nurturing and also like stress, those stress balls. So, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was weird that these like negative characters had something that looked comforting at the same time. So the first piece I ever actually made was this one. It was called Dalek.
Oh, wow. Yeah, yeah.
And I was like thinking about the idea of like abundance and like those who like the only way you could really in the very beginning when like during the colonial times to even be hospitable or welcoming to someone, it was always a representation that they had money, that they had power. Now we don't think about it in that way, what welcoming means. But if way back in the Enlightenment period, the only people that could welcome people is those who had money. And in a lot of ways, we kind of think about that too, like the bravado of like, going all out, when you have like a party, things of that nature. So I was thinking about that, like if you were really, like, even though this is like called Dalek and Daleks were negative, I was trying to flip that idea.
Right. I mean, there's such fascinating things, like
Yes.
I would just love to, walk around the corner of a gallery in a museum and see this and have to reckon with it.
Yes. And it's not going nowhere. Kind of
Yeah, I mean, it's like sort of like marvelously like still and static, and you perambulate and think over like, what is this I'm seeing? That's the thing that I've always loved about abstraction, because it doesn't offer you any any entry. You have to, you've got to come kind of prepared.
Yes.
You have to come incredibly open-minded.
And that's the reason why I feel like it's very universal.
Yeah. Indeed. When you're making these, I mean, obviously they're hollow because
Yes,
they have to be hollow to be fired.
So I start with a coil. It's all coil method. Coil.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So
Old
it's already
school.
hot. Yep. So coil, just old school coil and pinching.
And then you are essentially, and not to give away any trade secrets, but
Oh no.
you're sort of using a tool to sort of alter the surface, or are you kind of like extruding elements and then sort of like adding?
Oh no, everything is like the form was made by coil pinch, and then I like squeeze it so it can feel like a body. And then like from that, which could take, like that Dalek piece is like, I think it was, it's like almost 20 inches tall and 20 inches wide. It was like, so it's like, stocky. And that's kind of large for a ceramic piece, anything 20 inches or bigger. So that was the intuitive fast moves. When I start making that texture, I'm just using a regular needle tool, and it looks like an etching tool. But those who know anything about clay, it's just the same needle tool that you do so you can make the top of your cup look nice and thin. So it's nothing special in these ceramics. One student knows what the needle tool looks like, and then I just start making marks into the clay.
Okay, so it really is like, you're taking away rather than adding. Or
Yes.
you're really not taking away. I mean, you're impressing,
Yeah. So I'm
changing
doing
the form.
incisions. So it's almost like a relief print.
Wow. That's really wild. I mean, I've never seen anything like your work. I think I'm certain I am not alone in that,
No.
people are transfixed by, it's not clear what it's even made out of,
Yes.
and that's terrific.
Yeah. And even the funny thing is, if you saw these before they were fired, they would be brown.
Sure.
So they only get this coloring, this black coloring, if it gets fired to a certain amount of heat.
Right.
So if I don't fire it to that heat, it will still look brown.
Have you ever fooled around with the idea of doing work that, I mean, obviously it wouldn't, it's been so long since I've done ceramics, like, if you didn't fire it, you could keep it moist for weeks and weeks and weeks if you kept spraying it down every half an hour, right? Eventually, if you quit doing that, it hardens into, there's a name for that state. I don't know what it is, right?
Greenware, leather hard, bone dry.
Yeah. Has that ever captured your fancy?
No, I never thought about it in that way. I always just thought about the firing ending, because I felt like I wanted the piece to have the clay body be the content. I didn't want to put glaze on top because I felt like that was like masking stuff.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So everyone always actually like, so weird that you don't use glaze. I was like, no, and I tell you why. And there's like, because of content reasons, and it makes sense to them after. That it took me a year to even figure out what kind of clay body I was going to actually use. That gave me this feeling of what I was looking for. This idea of welcoming, this idea of it feels like you want to touch. I want you to touch this thing. It's like it's inviting you to touch. And so many times art you don't supposed to, but no,
right.
Everyone wants to touch these.
I mean, that's potentially like terrible, right? Because, they're not going to be able to touch these things at the Smithsonian.
No.
Well,
They could, and then some person takes them away.
Sure. Oh, brother. I just did a job on Tuesday, and we installed a a bronze statue of Ruth Bader Ginsburg
Oh, wow.
in the lobby of one of these, massive condominiums on Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn. And the people who were essentially hiring us to do this were talking about how they wanted people to go up and, rub her as if they were going to the wax museum. They had anticipated hordes of school kids, going up there, getting their selfie, and then, rubbing her back or, playing with her. And I thought that's terrific. And obviously the bronze can withstand it. The ceramic, on the other hand, is definitely, it begs to be touched, but it really can't be touched.
Yeah.
One of my favorite, Louise Nevelson, terrific work, very large, but then the stuff that got really big was cast bronze.
Yes.
Have you ever thought of given the chance to sort of ship over and go over to another medium so that you can make things on a larger scale?
Yeah, I have. Before COVID, I was supposed to go to Long Beach State, and there's the largest kilns in the United States.
Oh, wow.
And so major artists that work in ceramics, and then they'll make that mold into bronze casting and things of that nature. They go to Long Beach, and so I was going to go there, but because of COVID, I wasn't able to do that because I wanted to make these pieces monumental.
Whoa. I mean, so tell the people out there, when you're saying large kilns, how large is large?
Oh, so these pieces would be at least the small would be 4 feet, but then it could go up to 8 to 10 feet tall.
Holy cow.
That's how large these kilns are.
That's
and they're known for how to help artists deal with that, because you're gonna have cranes and all those different things.
Yeah, of course.
So I was super excited about it, but and the great thing about it is that even though once COVID gets better, they still offered for me to come for the summer to make work there.
That's very cool. There's a fellow who teaches at Hudson who's done the Kohler residency.
Oh yes, that's great.
I think that's in Wisconsin.
It is.
Right?
It's in Wisconsin. Actually, it's in Kohler, Wisconsin. My first year at grad school at Iowa, all of the ceramic grads, we all went there for a day and visited the Kohler Museum. It's amazing. And they have residencies that you can do slip casting.
Yeah.
And they'll help you. And it's cool because they have slip all inside these different tubes that they have guns that you can get the slip right out of a gun.
Of course. I mean, yeah, it's all the pro style stuff.
Yeah.
I could go on and on and on, but we should probably open up the room to questions. So hopefully, folks, I had wanted to mention this earlier, and of course I didn't. But if you have questions for Donté, why don't you throw them into the chat, and then I will. I guess Donté can read them too, right? And we can answer any questions you have about anything that you'd like.
Right.
So Katie's asking, any site-specific or outdoor installations that you're, preparing for? I mean, like you said, you were wanting to go to Long Beach, but
yeah. So right now, no, because I don't have the facilities yet. But once that does happen, I do have some ideas for some site-specific places. So that's a great question, because that's something that I feel this work could be really powerful